Backstage was quiet, except for the soft buzz of voices coming from the packed auditorium. The red curtain separated the small backstage area from the bright stage. A 12-year-old girl stood there in a plain blue dress, holding a thin folder close to her chest. Her shoes were old, the kind that had seen many school days and hand-me-down years. She didn't speak, didn't look around, just waited near the wall with her eyes on the floor. Her name wasn't on the program. No one had announced her. She wasn't invited, not officially, but she came anyway. A few other students passed by. Their dresses glittered, their parents holding cameras. One boy with shiny black shoes and slicked hair looked at her and whispered something to his friend. They both laughed quietly, but the girl didn't react. She wasn't here for them. Back at home, her mother had said, "You only need one moment. Just one song, that's all." So here she was, standing in a place she technically wasn't supposed to be. The school's annual music night was a big deal. It was held in the main hall, where even local news sometimes showed up. Parents filled the seats wearing jackets and dresses, holding flowers and phones. The program was full of kids who had taken lessons since they were 5. Names with performed in state finals or trained under this teacher next to them. But no one wrote anything next to her name, because no one added her name. Her mother had asked the school, begged really. "She's good," she said. "Please let her play, even just once." They told her, "All the slots are full, but maybe at the end, if there's time." So the girl came with hope, not promises. She didn't have a shiny black binder or a music stand, just a folder with 3 sheets of paper. The first page had her handwriting notes, chords, scribbles, lyrics. No one would sing. The girl looked up when she heard the principal walk past. He didn't notice her, just talked to the stage crew. "We've only got the grand piano set up," he said. "Don't bother with the old one." The girl listened quietly. She knew the old piano well. She'd used it once during an open school event. It was slightly out of tune. One leg had a wobble, and the pedal stuck sometimes. But it made sound, and for her, that was enough. The first performer was announced, a tall girl in a red dress who bowed with practiced grace. She played a classical piece, clean and perfect. Applause followed, then more performances, pop songs, duets, even one boy who sang while playing. The girl listened to every note, memorizing them in her head. Not out of jealousy, but curiosity. She didn't compare. She simply prepared. As the night continued, time ticked forward. Each performance ended with cheers. Each child walked off with flowers. The girl didn't move from her place near the curtain. "Hey," a boy whispered to her. "Why are you standing there?" She didn't answer, just looked away. He shrugged and walked off soon. The host came out and said, "That concludes our scheduled performances." Parents began clapping louder, assuming it was the end. Some even stood up to leave, but just then, something happened. The lights flickered. For a moment, the speakers cut off. The microphones clicked. One of the smart pianos, the newer ones connected to sound systems, shut down. A short blackout, maybe 10 seconds. The host returned, laughing. "Well, looks like technology needs a break too." People chuckled and sat back down. The girl looked over to a staff member and gently tugged her sleeve. "Can I play?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The woman looked confused. "There's no piano ready," she said. The girl looked at the old upright piano sitting in the corner. Unused, unpolished, forgotten. The woman hesitated. "It's not tuned properly." The girl nodded slowly. "But it still plays." A few moments later, the host was told, "One more performer." He said, "Not on the list, but brave enough to step forward." The room quieted again, curious, some people turning their heads. The girl walked out alone. No announcement, no fanfare. Her dress was simple, her folder shaking slightly in her hands. She walked to the old piano as people whispered, "Who's that? Is this planned?" She didn't look at anyone. She sat down, placed the folder gently on the bench, and let her fingers rest on the dusty keys. She took one breath, then started to play. The first note was soft, like a whisper, then came the next, a little stronger. And before anyone could question her presence, the music took over. The old piano creaked a little. One key stuck for a second, but her fingers didn't stop. She knew how to move past broken notes. She didn't panic, she adjusted, she had played. Like this before, on keyboards missing buttons, on tables with no sound. She learned to imagine the notes in her head when she didn't have the tools. Now she had real keys under her hands, and even if they were chipped and dusty, they were hers for this moment. The audience didn't make a sound. Some leaned forward, some whispered, "Who is she?" But none of them left. Her music wasn't fast, it wasn't full of tricks. It was calm, steady, but emotional, like something she had carried with her for a long time. Each note seemed to tell a part of a story. The melody wasn't from a famous composer. It wasn't even something most people recognized. That's because it was hers, at home. She wrote music late at night while her mom folded laundry. She played quiet songs while her mom sat beside her, sometimes half asleep from work. There was no teacher, no one correcting her posture or speed. Just a mother's tired smile and a girl's full heart. She didn't have sheet music. She had memory, muscle, and emotion. That was her training. As she continued to play, a few people in the audience started recording with their phones, not because they knew who she was, but because something in her music made them pause. It felt raw and honest. It didn't try to impress, it tried to speak. In the front row, her mother sat with both hands pressed over her mouth, her eyes already wet. She had promised her daughter that if she just got one chance, she could do something special. Now, she was watching that promise unfold. The principal stood near the curtain with a surprised look on his face. He whispered to the music teacher beside him, "Did you know about this?" The teacher shook her head slowly, eyes fixed on the girl. "No one told me," she said. "But I think we're watching something important." The piece went on for nearly 4 minutes. There were soft parts, loud parts, and one section that sounded almost like the sound of rain falling. That part made someone in the second row close their eyes and smile. When the last note came, she held it for just a moment longer, then lifted her fingers gently, as if saying, "Goodbye." The room was quiet, completely still then. A single clap, then another, and then a wave of applause filled the hall. She didn't smile, not yet. She looked for her mother first. When she saw her standing with tears on her face, clapping with both hands raised high, only then did she let herself smile. She stood up, gave a small bow, and started to walk off the stage. Not quickly, not proud, just thankful. A tall man in a long coat stood near the side of the stage. He worked with a local youth music program, and he had been planning to leave early that night, but the power flicker had delayed him just long enough to hear her play. Now, he stepped forward. "What's her name?" he asked the woman near the sound booth. She shrugged. She wasn't on the list. The man followed the girl and her mother into the hallway. "Excuse me," he said softly. "Do you have a minute?" They both turned, surprised. He smiled. "I just wanted to say." That was one of the most honest performances I've heard in years. Her mother's hands tightened slightly around the folder. "Thank you," she said, unsure what else to say. "Does she take lessons?" he asked. The girl shook her head quietly. "I'd like to offer her a spot in our program," he said. "Full scholarship." The mother's eyes widened. She looked at her daughter, then back at him. "You really mean that?" "I do," he said. "She's ready, even if the piano wasn't." After the showcase, everything felt like a quiet blur. The girl walked off stage slowly, her heart still beating fast. She didn't hear the applause anymore. It had faded into a soft memory in her head. What she remembered most was the moment. Her fingers left the keys, and the silence that followed. That silence wasn't empty. It felt full, like the music was still floating in the air. Backstage, a few performers nodded at her. One said, "That was beautiful," another added. It didn't sound like a performance. It felt like a memory. She just smiled, eyes a little glassy, hands still slightly shaking. Her mother met her in the hallway, arms open. The hug they shared said more than any words could. Neither of them spoke right away. They just held each other tightly. Then her mother whispered, "You did it." The girl nodded. "We did." Outside the venue, the air was cool. They walked toward the train station slowly. Neither wanted the night to end. That evening, at home, they ate takeout noodles on the couch. Her mom raised a paper cup of tea and said, "To the girl with her name in lights." The girl raised her cup of juice and clinked it with hers. They laughed together, not loudly, but freely. The next few days were busy in a way she had never known before. She received emails from people in music programs, offers to join youth workshops. One local radio station asked her to visit and play a piece live. She was nervous at first. She didn't like speaking in front of cameras or microphones. But when the moment came, she sat in front of the mic, placed her fingers on the studio's piano, and played the same way she always had, like she was playing for one person, not a crowd. Her story began to spread, not because she was famous, but because people were touched by how she played, and how she came from a place where dreams weren't easy, but still possible. At school, things changed too. She still sat at the same lunch table, but now others sat with her. A few classmates started asking about piano, music, how to write songs. One boy said, "I started trying to write lyrics, but they sound stupid," she told him. Nothing sounds stupid when it's real. Her teachers gave her extra support. One even brought in an old keyboard from the school storage room. "Teach the others how to use it," she said, "if they want to learn." So during lunch breaks, the girl started showing 3 or 4 kids how to play basic chords. It wasn't formal, but it was something, and for her, it felt like giving. Back at home, things were still tight. Bills still came, and her mother still worked long shifts. But their small apartment didn't feel so small anymore. It felt like a place where something special had started. One evening, while the girl was writing a new piece in her notebook, her mother sat nearby sewing a small tear in her work shirt. She looked up and said, "You know, there's something I've been thinking about." The girl paused, curious. Her mom continued, "You've given me a reason to believe in something again." The girl didn't quite understand. Her mother smiled and added, "I want to go back to school. Maybe study something in the evenings, maybe even music." For a moment, the girl just stared. Then she smiled slowly. "That would be amazing," she said. "We could play together." The idea made them both laugh. A mother and daughter, 2 students, 2 musicians. They didn't have much, but they had each other. And they had music. As the weeks passed, the girl kept writing. She filled notebook after notebook with new melodies, new stories and sound. Some were happy, some were sad. Some were soft like morning light. Others were strong like thunder, but all of them were hers. One night, she was invited to a small event at a local community center. It wasn't fancy, just folding chairs, a borrowed keyboard, and string lights. But the room was full. Not of critics, but of neighbors, friends, teachers, people who had heard of the girl who played like she meant it. When she sat down and looked out at the crowd, she saw more than faces. She saw support. She saw what music could do, bring people together, not for fame, but for feeling. She took a breath, placed her hands on the keys, and began to play, not just a song, but a thank you to her mother, her community, her younger self who once played on broken keys. The sound of soft applause faded into the background as she lifted her hands from the keys. Her fingers rested on her lap, still warm from playing. The girl looked up and saw the small crowd smiling back at her teachers, neighbors, old classmates, and her mother in the front row. It wasn't the biggest stage she had played on, but in her heart, it felt the most personal, the most honest. She gave a quiet bow and walked off slowly, holding her notebook close to her chest, the same notebook that had followed her since the beginning, filled with songs, mistakes, dreams, and pages worn from too many tears and too many hopes. Backstage, her mom was waiting with a small paper bag. "I didn't get flowers," she said, "but I made your favorite sandwich." The girl laughed. "That's even better." They sat together on the bench behind the curtain, sharing food, sharing peace. Later that night, while brushing her teeth, the girl paused in the mirror. She stared at her own reflection, not looking for flaws, but realizing how far she'd come. The girl in the mirror wasn't scared anymore. She still didn't talk much, but now she didn't have to. Music had become her voice. Not just something she played, but something she lived. Her journey wasn't over, but now she understood that the beginning had always been enough. One weekend, she was invited to visit the same school where she once stood in the shadows backstage. This time, not as a student, but as a guest speaker for younger kids learning piano for the first time. She walked into the music room and saw 10 students sitting in a half circle. Most were fidgeting, a few held small keyboards, some looked nervous. She took a seat and said simply, "I used to be just like you." That got their attention. She told them about the broken keyboard, the missing keys, the old bench. She didn't make her story sound perfect, she made it real, and they listened. Not because she had trophies or awards, but because she had been where they were. One small girl raised her hand and asked, "Were you ever scared of messing up?" The girl smiled, "Every single time. But I played anyway," she added. "Because music isn't about being perfect, it's about being true." After the session, one of the younger boys approached and said, "I made a song too. But it's not very good." She knelt down and said, "Can I hear it?" He played a few shy notes, looking down the whole time. When he finished, she looked him in the eye and said, "It's a great start. Keep going." That evening, she and her mother walked home in the cool spring air. The city was glowing with soft lights and quiet traffic. They didn't say much, but they didn't have to. The music was still playing inside both of them, not from speakers, not from keys, but from everything they had shared, from silence to sound, from struggle to strength. At home, the keyboard waited in the corner, not a prize, not a decoration, just part of her life now, like a friend who never left. She sat down again and started a new piece. No title, no plan, just feeling. It began slowly, the kind of melody that sounded like a memory. She didn't know where it would lead, but that was okay. She had learned that not all music needs to know the ending before it starts. Across the room, her mom picked up a book and sat nearby. They didn't speak, only the music filled the space. And somewhere in that quiet apartment, in the warm flicker of a lamp, a girl once unseen became someone whose voice no longer needed to be loud, to be heard. She had waited her whole life for the world to be ready for her. But the truth was, she had always been ready, even when the piano wasn't. The morning of the city showcase arrived with soft sunlight coming through the apartment window. The girl stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the sleeves of her simple white shirt. Her mom had ironed it the night before, careful with every fold, every button. "You look like a real performer," her mother said with a quiet smile. The girl didn't feel nervous, not yet. She had played this piece many times now. Each time it felt like telling a story, not just playing a song. This wasn't a cover of someone else's music. This one was hers. From the first note to the last. They arrived early at the concert hall. It was bigger than any place she'd ever played. The stage was wide, the lights high above, the floor polished and clean. She could see rows of empty seats waiting to be filled. In a few hours, those seats would hold parents, teachers, students, and guests. Her name was printed in the program, spelled correctly, in bold letters. Just seeing it made her eyes sting with tears she didn't expect. It wasn't just a paper, it was proof. Proof that she belonged here. Backstage, she waited again, like she had at the school recital. But this time, she wasn't hiding in the shadows. She had a spot, a time, a place. Other performers stood nearby, warming up with scales or stretches. Some looked serious. Others smiled nervously. One girl with a long braid turned to her and asked, "Are you the one playing an original piece?" The girl nodded. "Yeah, that's really cool," the other girl said. "I wish I could do that." For a moment, the nervousness melted, replaced by quiet pride. Not arrogance, just the feeling that all those hours at the dusty keyboard had led her here for a reason when her turn came. Her name was called with a respectful pause. She stepped out under the lights. Not too fast, not too slow. The piano on stage was grand, larger than any she'd touched. She took her seat and placed her fingers on the keys. The room was silent, not the kind of silence that feels empty, but the kind that holds its breath. Then she began. The first note was soft, just like the one at the school recital, but now, every note that followed was stronger, clearer. She wasn't chasing the music, she was guiding it. She played like she had something to say, and the piano listened. The piece flowed like a river, sometimes gentle, sometimes crashing. It told the story of nights in a small apartment, of quiet dreams, of a mother's hand on her back. The high notes danced like laughter, and the low ones whispered pain and hope. There were no words, but somehow the music spoke everything she'd ever wanted to say. In the front row, her mother sat completely still, hands tight around her small purse. Her heart pounded with every note. She remembered all the nights she sat beside her daughter, barely able to stay awake after work. And now she was watching her child command a stage she never imagined. She'd reach as the final note rang out. The girl lifted her fingers and let the sound fade slowly. She didn't rush off stage. She sat for a breath, then stood, bowed gently, and walked off. Behind her, the applause started, not just polite clapping, but loud, rising, real applause. It followed her as she stepped into the wings, heart beating fast, cheeks warm. Her instructor met her there with a wide smile. "You did it," she said softly. "That wasn't just music, that was art." Other performers nodded at her as she passed. Some clapped her on the shoulder. One said, "That was amazing." The girl didn't say much. She wasn't the type to talk big. But inside, she felt taller, like something inside her had stretched and grown. After the show, people came to speak to her and her mother. A woman from a local arts program said, "We'd love to feature her in our youth artist spotlight." Another offered to connect them with a piano tutor who had worked with professional composers. Her mother kept repeating, "Thank you," over and over. But all the girl could do was smile and hold her folder a little tighter. That night, back at home, the apartment was quiet again. The keyboard sat in the corner, waiting. She walked over, sat down, and played the first few notes of something new. Not a performance piece, not something to impress, just a song, simple and soft. She didn't know yet what it would become, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't done, not even close. The next few weeks moved like a quiet dream. Every morning, the girl woke up a little earlier than before. She'd wash her face, eat a quick breakfast, and then sit down at her keyboard. The sun would barely be up, but her fingers were already playing. She didn't need anyone to tell her to practice. She wanted to. Music had always been her escape, but now it was also her path. Every key she pressed felt like a small step toward something bigger. It wasn't just about being noticed anymore. It was about getting better, learning more, building something real. Her instructors noticed the change. She listened closely, asked questions, stayed behind after class. She still didn't talk much, but when she played, she said everything she needed to. One day after class, her instructor sat down beside her. "You've come a long way," she said with a gentle voice, "but I think you're ready for something new." The girl looked up, curious. "There's a state-level showcase in 2 months." The instructor continued, "You'll be one of the youngest there. But I believe you're ready." The girl's heart skipped a beat. State level meant bigger crowds, serious judges, and a lot of attention. She felt a flutter of fear, but under that excitement, she nodded slowly. "I want to try." That night, she told her mother while they ate dinner together. Her mom stopped with the fork halfway to her mouth. "State?" she repeated, eyes wide. The girl nodded. "It's in 2 months." Her mom smiled and reached across the table to squeeze her hand. "We'll find a way," she said. "We always do," and they did. They filled out the forms, printed the papers, and sent in the recordings. The entry fee was more than they could afford, but her mom picked up a few extra shifts. She didn't complain, just worked, smiled, and made sure her daughter had everything she needed every night while the city outside hummed and buzzed. The girl played the same piece over and over. It was another original, newer, more complex, full of changes in tempo and emotion. It wasn't just about showing skill. It was about telling a story again, this time with more color, more fire, more hope. But pressure brings doubt, and one night, after 3 hours of non-stop playing, she made a mistake in the same spot 3 times in a row. She hit the wrong key, her hands froze, and suddenly she pushed away from the bench. Frustration filled her chest like smoke. "I'm not ready," she whispered to herself. "This is too big." Her mom came into the room quietly, saw her sitting on the floor. Without saying anything, she sat beside her, leaned against the wall. After a while she said, "Do you remember the first time you played on that broken keyboard?" The girl nodded. "You were 8, her mom said, smiling. "You only knew 4 notes, but you played them like the world was listening." The girl didn't speak, just listened. Her mom continued, "It's never been about being perfect. It's always been about being brave." The next morning, the girl got up again before the sun. She didn't force herself to play the hardest part. Instead, she just played slow, soft, honest, and slowly, the pressure faded. Replaced again by focus, weeks passed, and the day of the state showcase came. They traveled by train to the venue, a large hall with velvet seats and tall windows. Other performers were dressed in formal wear. Some had teachers with them, some even had small teams. She had her folder, her mom, and the same white shirt from her last performance, carefully pressed. Backstage, she sat quietly, eyes closed, hands folded. Her name was on the program again, this time under featured young composer. She heard voices, footsteps, clapping in the distance, but none of it reached her. All she could hear was the rhythm inside her chest. When her name was called, she stood slowly and walked toward the stage. The lights were warm, the piano glossy and massive. She didn't let fear in. Not this time. She sat down, placed her fingers on the keys, and began. The music that followed was different from anything she'd played before. It was gentle and bold, quiet and brave. It moved like a story told by someone who had lived it. There were no flashy parts, no tricks, just truth. When she finished, the room was silent. Then someone stood and clapped, then another, and another, until the room echoed with applause. And in the front row, her mom stood with both hands to her mouth, tears falling, not from surprise, but from pride. The hallway outside the auditorium was nearly empty. A few parents walked by, still chatting about the night's performances, but the girl and her mother stood quietly by the wall, holding the folder close. They didn't know what to say after. The man offered her a scholarship. He was kind, not pushy. He introduced himself as someone who helped young musicians from under-resourced backgrounds. He said he had heard her play, and that was enough. "You're special," he told her gently. "That can't be taught." The girl looked down at her hands, her fingers still stiff from the old piano. She wasn't sure if she should believe him. All her life, she'd played for herself or her mom. No one else ever called it special. Until now, her mom cleared her throat, still emotional. "We've never had lessons," she said quietly. The man nodded. "Even more reason to help." He explained that the program offered free lessons, instruments, and mentorship. It didn't matter where she came from, only where she could go. The girl didn't say much, just listened. But inside, something was stirring, a kind of hope that felt almost too big to hold. They walked home that night under quiet stars. Her mom held her hand tighter than usual. "You did it," she whispered. "You really did it." The girl just smiled, too tired and overwhelmed to speak. Their apartment was small, just 2 rooms and a narrow kitchen, but that night, it felt warmer than ever. She placed the folder on the table, opened it, and looked at her scribbled notes. Some were messy, others barely readable, but to her, every line was a memory. She remembered how she wrote her first piece at age 8. She couldn't read music then, so she drew little stars where the high notes were supposed to go. Back then, their keyboard had only 20 keys, and 3 didn't work. But she played anyway, humming the rest in her head. Her mom used to sit on the couch nearby, closing her eyes after a long day at work. Sometimes she'd fall asleep while the girl played. Other times she'd whisper, "That one made me feel something." No teacher had ever said that to her. No judge, no school notice, no program guide. Only her mother, over and over, believing in something no one else could see. The next morning, she woke up early. She had school, but her mind was still filled with music. She couldn't stop thinking about the man's words, "You're special." At lunch, she sat alone at the corner table like usual. Some kids talked about the recital. One said, "Did you see that random girl go up at the end?" Another laughed. "I thought it was a mistake." She lowered her head, not wanting them to see her. But then a girl from another class walked over with a tray and said, "Was that you who played that last song?" She looked up slowly. "Yeah." "It was beautiful," the girl said, sitting down beside her. "No one plays like that. Not even the kids with tutors." For a second, she didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to compliments, especially from classmates. She just nodded and said, "Thanks." It was the first time someone her age had ever said that to her. When she got home that day, she found a letter waiting on the table. It had the logo of the youth music program. Inside was a welcome note, a calendar, and a voucher to pick up a real piano keyboard. Full size, professional, brand new. Her mother stood beside her, barely holding back tears. "I never thought we'd see something like this," she whispered. The girl reached out and hugged her tightly. "Neither did I," she said softly. That weekend, they went to pick up the keyboard. It came in a big box, and it took both of them to carry it upstairs. They cleared space in the corner of the living room and set it up together. When she pressed the first key, it sounded clean, strong, and clear. She laughed a little, almost in disbelief. "No missing notes," she said, smiling. Her mom smiled back. "Looks like the piano's finally ready too." That night, the girl played a new melody. It wasn't written down anywhere yet. It came straight from her heart, soft, steady, filled with gratitude and dreams. She knew she still had far to go. There would be challenges, more practice and moments of doubt, but for the first time, she felt like the world might actually listen, and that maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. It had only been 1 week since the recital, but everything in the girl's world already felt different. Her mornings were the same old serial, the sound of traffic outside, her mom rushing to get ready for work. Yet, something had changed inside her. Now, she had a real keyboard in the corner of the living room. Not a toy, not something secondhand or broken. This one was full-sized, had weighted keys, and even came with a bench that didn't wobble. When she sat down at it, she didn't feel like a child pretending anymore. She felt like she belonged. After school, she came straight home, dropped her bag, and played for hours. She practiced old pieces, made up new ones, and sometimes just closed her eyes and let her fingers wander. Her mother would sit nearby with a cup of tea, smiling quietly. No words needed, just music filling the space between them. But along with the excitement came nerves, because the program she had been accepted into would begin next week. It wasn't just a few lessons, it was a full scholarship for young musicians. There would be trained instructors, formal sessions, other students, real talent, real competition. She had never read music the way most kids did. She learned by feeling and memory. Would they laugh at her? Would they think she didn't belong? These thoughts kept her up at night sometimes, staring at the ceiling. But then she would sit up, walk over to the keyboard, and play until the worry faded. On her first day at the music center, she arrived early. The building was big and full of posters showing past students holding trophies or playing in front of crowds. Her mom gave her a small lunch bag and kissed her forehead. "You've already made it farther than anyone ever thought," she said softly. The girl gave a nervous nod, then walked through the glass doors. Inside, it smelled like new books and old wood. There were pianos in nearly every room. and each one looked more expensive than anything she'd ever touched. She was given a welcome folder and introduced to a woman with kind eyes and a calm voice. "This will be your piano instructor." Someone said. The woman leaned down and asked, "Do you play by ear?" The girl nodded slowly, unsure if that was a good thing, but the woman smiled wide and said, "Then you already understand more than half the room." Her first session wasn't easy. They showed her sheet music and expected her to read it on the spot. She stumbled, got confused with symbols, lost her place. Some of the other kids watched her with puzzled looks. One even whispered, "She doesn't know that note." The girl's face went red, but she didn't cry. That night, she didn't eat much dinner. Her mom noticed but didn't ask questions. Instead, she just put a hand on her shoulder and said, "Tough day?" The girl nodded. Her mom smiled gently. "Every song has hard parts. Play through them." The next day, she went back to the center with her head higher. She brought her own notebook this time, the one filled with her hand-drawn songs and stars. After class, she asked the instructor if she could play something she had written herself. The woman agreed, and the room grew quiet. She played slowly, carefully, but full of feeling. It wasn't perfect, not to trained ears, but it made people listen. Even the kids who didn't talk to her began asking, "Did you write that?" She nodded quietly. One of them said, "Can you show me how?" Something shifted that day. They still taught her scales, notes, and music theory, but they also let her teach them how to feel music without reading it. She became the girl who didn't just follow music, she created it. As weeks passed, her confidence grew. Her hands got faster, her timing sharper. She still made mistakes, but she no longer feared them. She understood now that mistakes were part of playing, part of learning, part of being real. And her music began to reflect that: real stories, real emotion, pieces that sounded like rainy days, quiet dreams, childhood memories, not just notes, but feelings at home. The walls that once echoed with silence now carried melody every night. Even neighbors began to notice, pausing in the hallway outside their door. "Your daughter plays beautifully," one of them said to her mother. She nodded with pride. She always did. One evening, while packing up after class, her instructor pulled her aside. "There's a city showcase next month," she said. "I want you to play." The girl froze for a moment, eyes wide. "In front of people?" she asked. The instructor nodded. "Yes, and this time, with your name on the program." The girl didn't say anything right away. She just looked down at her hands, then quietly said, "I'm ready."